The air hummed with the subtle vibration of thousands of voices, speaking dozens of languages, a symphony of diplomatic chatter that filled the vast chamber with anticipation. Among them, Princess Sina Eltar moved with practiced grace, her azure skin shimmering with ceremonial oils that caught the light in swirling patterns across her delicate facial ridges. The intricate markings on her forearms indicated her royal lineage, 15 generations of rulers who had guided Silaris from a single-planet civilization to the dominant power in this sector of space. Her posture communicated absolute confidence bordering on arrogance, the natural demeanor of someone who had never known anything but privilege and power. "Another victory celebration," she whispered to her companion, a fellow noble of the Silarian court whose skin bore the slightly darker blue of the southern continent. "As if we needed the primitive worlds to defeat mere machines. The void would have fallen to our superior technology eventually." Her voice carried just far enough to reach the ears of the human honor guard positioned along the entrance to the throne room. 6 of them stood motionless, their faces carved from stone, dressed in formal Earth military attire that seemed absurdly simplistic compared to the bioluminescent battle armor of the Salarian Royal Guard. The humans' uniforms, though meticulously maintained, lacked the integrated technology and living components that Silarians considered the bare minimum for formal occasions. "Look at them," Sena continued, making no effort to lower her voice now as she guided her companion past the human delegation. "Soft-skinned creatures from a dust ball. How they survived their first interstellar winter is beyond comprehension. No exoskeleton, minimal environmental adaptations, sensory capabilities barely evolved beyond detecting basic light and sound patterns." The tallest of the human guards stood at perfect attention, his eyes fixed on some distant point above the heads of passing dignitaries. Lieutenant Adrian Cole had weathered worse than the barbed words of an alien princess. The scar that ran from his temple down his neck, hidden beneath his high collar, was proof enough of that. 27 millimeters of serrated void metal had nearly severed his carotid artery during the Battle of Talos 7. The emergency field surgery that saved his life had been performed without anesthetic while he remained conscious, directing the medic through the procedure. Pain had become something of an old companion since then. "They say humans can only breathe a narrow band of atmospheric compounds." Sena's laughter tinkled like breaking glass across the polished floor. "Imagine being so fragile, requiring specific temperature ranges, precise atmospheric composition, consistent gravitational conditions. The universe must seem terribly hostile when you're constructed from such inferior biological materials." Adrian's eyes flickered, briefly toward the princess, then returned to their forward gaze. His military discipline held firm, but something in that momentary glance might have given a more perceptive observer pause, a fleeting glimpse of calculation rather than offense. Lieutenant Cole had not survived 23 major engagements against the Void by reacting emotionally to provocations. The grand ceremony commemorating the Alliance victory over the Void, a hive intelligence of autonomous machines that had threatened to consume all organic life, was the culmination of 5 brutal years of war that had devastated hundreds of worlds across multiple systems. Representatives from every surviving major civilization had gathered on Solaris, the jeweled capital of the galactic arm, to formalize peace treaties and honor the fallen. The diplomatic significance of the gathering could hardly be overstated. The future shape of interstellar relations would be determined in the discussions that followed the ceremonial proceedings. Empress Lyra Eltar, ruler of Solaris and 36 tributary worlds, observed her daughter's behavior from her elevated throne. Her face revealed nothing, maintaining the perfect composure expected of someone who had guided her civilization through its darkest hours. But her 4-fingered hand tightened almost imperceptibly around the ceremonial scepter she held. The Empress had lived through enough history to recognize when momentous shifts were occurring beneath the surface of political pageantry. Unlike her daughter, she understood that the galaxy had been fundamentally transformed by recent events and that old assumptions about power and status might prove dangerously outdated. The human delegation was small compared to others, consisting of only 12 representatives, where other species had brought contingents numbering in the dozens. Earth had suffered disproportionately during the conflict, their colonies on the rim serving as the first line of defense when the void emerged from the darkness between stars. Entire settlements had been lost, millions of lives extinguished before the nature of the threat had even been fully understood. Yet they had fought with unexpected ferocity and ingenuity that had shocked their allies and enemies alike, developing countermeasures and battle tactics that proved crucial in turning the tide of the war. "The Terran delegation approaches," announced the ceremonial herald, his voice resonating through bioamplifiers embedded in the chamber walls. The sound reverberated with perfect acoustical precision, commanding immediate attention from all present. Adrian Cole stepped forward from the honor guard, joining the 5 other human representatives as they prepared to be formally presented to the Empress. His movement was fluid, controlled, the motion of a predator, not prey. Despite Saina's mockery of human physiology, several veteran Silurian warriors tracked his movement with instinctive wariness. They had fought alongside humans in the later stages of the war and had learned to respect their unpredictability in combat situations. Saina's voice rose again, now pitched to carry throughout the assembly as the human delegation approached the central dais. "Perhaps we should have provided them with breathing apparatus," she said with theatrical concern that dripped with condescension. "Their lungs must strain in our superior atmosphere. The oxygen concentration alone must be overwhelming their primitive respiratory systems." Several courtiers laughed nervously, eyes darting toward the Empress, uncertain if they should join the princess's mockery or maintain diplomatic decorum. The Salarian nobles, who had never experienced combat firsthand, seemed most amused by her comments, while those who had actually faced the void alongside human allies remained conspicuously silent. Adrian's face remained impassive as the delegation continued its approach toward the throne. Only someone who knew humans well might have noticed the slight tightening around his eyes, the minute adjustment of his stance, weight shifting forward onto the balls of his feet, preparing for something that would not come. Not here, not now. These were the unconscious physical adaptations of a combat veteran. Muscle memory responding to perceived threat even when the rational mind recognized there was no immediate danger. "They lack even basic exoskeletal protection," Saina continued, warming to her subject as she circled closer to the human delegation. Her graceful movements drew attention from throughout the chamber, her status as royal heir ensuring that her performance would be observed by all present. Imagine facing battle with nothing but that soft outer layer. The merest impact would rupture their organs. The simplest environmental hazard would destroy their functioning. It's a wonder any survived to reach this ceremony. The vast hall had grown uncomfortably quiet. The ambassadors from the Proxima colonies and the Trade Federation shifted uneasily, their own alliances with Earth too valuable to jeopardize with laughter, yet unwilling to challenge the Salarian princess directly. Diplomatic calculations could be read in the subtle body language of each delegation, weighing the political cost of offense against the potential benefits of alignment with Salarian prejudices. A voice sliced through the silence, cold and precise as a surgical laser. "Daughter!" The single word from Empress Lyra Eltar carried the weight of mountains. Saina froze mid-gesture, her 4-chambered heart skipping a beat beneath her ceremonial attire. The subtle harmonic undertones in her mother's voice communicated layers of meaning that only another Salarian could fully comprehend. Disappointment, warning, and imminent consequences all conveyed in a single word. "You will be silent." The command was not delivered with rage, but with a quiet intensity that made it far more terrible. The Empress rose from her living throne, the neural connections detaching from her ceremonial armor with whispered hisses as biologically engineered interfaces retracted into their housing chambers. She descended the 7 steps to the main floor with deliberate slowness, her gaze never leaving her daughter. Each step seemed to increase the gravitational field around her, as if the very fabric of reality recognized her authority. The assembled dignitaries parted before her, bowing deeply as she passed. Even the oldest among them, species who had voyaged between stars when humans were still discovering fire, showed absolute deference to the Silurian Empress. Her reputation as both a military strategist and diplomatic genius had only been enhanced by her leadership during the Void War. "Forgive me, Mother, I was merely—" "Silence!" Saina's mouth closed instantly, her secondary breathing slits flattening against her neck in the Silurian physiological response to acute stress. Public correction from the Empress was unprecedented. Royal family disputes were traditionally handled in the strictest privacy, maintaining the illusion of perfect unity to outsiders. Empress Lyra stopped 2 paces from Lieutenant Cole, studying him with ancient eyes that had witnessed the rise and fall of stellar empires. The human met her gaze steadily, neither challenging nor submissive, simply present. His posture communicated respect without subservience, a diplomatic nuance that did not go unnoticed by the Empress. "Do you know of Talos 7, daughter?" the Empress asked, though her eyes remained on the human officer before her. The question contained a dangerous undercurrent recognizable to anyone familiar with Silurian rhetorical traditions. It was the beginning of a public lesson, a technique rarely employed outside academic settings and almost never directed at a member of the royal family. Sina frowned in confusion, her facial ridges contracting in the equivalent of a human furrowing their brow. The orbital way station? It was destroyed during the third wave of the Void's advance, approximately 3 standard years ago. "Partially destroyed," corrected the Empress, her tone carrying the unmistakable edge of someone setting a verbal trap. "And do you know why it was only partially destroyed, rather than completely annihilated, as were 17 similar stations in that sector?" The princess hesitated, her mind racing through diplomatic briefings and military reports she had studied. The moment stretched uncomfortably as she sensed the danger in giving an incomplete answer. I I believe there was a tactical intervention by Alliance forces that managed to prevent total destruction of the facility." "Not Alliance forces," said Lyra, each word precisely measured and delivered with perfect clarity. "Human forces, specifically 14 human Marines under the command of then-Sergeant Adrian Cole." A murmur passed through the assembly like a sudden breeze across a field of tall grass. Many present knew the story, though few spoke of it openly. It was not a comfortable tale for non-humans to recall, particularly those whose governments had made specific strategic decisions during that crisis. "Talos 7 served as a civilian evacuation point for 3 of our outer colony worlds," continued the Empress, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber without apparent effort. "When the Void attacked, our defensive fleet was drawn away by a feint at Proxima Centauri. The station's shields were failing. 10,000 Silurian civilians were trapped inside, including 300 children from the scientific enclave on Praxis 2. She turned now, addressing the entire assembly rather than just her daughter. Her movement was calculated for maximum dramatic effect, drawing every eye in the chamber. No Allied ships responded to their distress call. The risk was deemed excessive. The discomfort in the room was palpable, manifesting in subtle physiological responses from various species. The slight color change in Proxima and integument, the raised dorsal spines of Centauri representatives, the accelerated bioluminescent patterns of Eridani diplomats. Many of the dignitaries present had been involved in that decision, weighing the tactical value of a single station against the strategic positioning of their fleets. The cool diplomatic language of acceptable losses had seemed reasonable in secure command centers, far from the reality of civilians facing imminent death. A single Earth vessel received the transmission, a patrol cutter with minimal armaments, and a complement of 14 Marines. They had no strategic reason to engage. No treaties obligated their intervention. Their commanding officer had specific orders to maintain patrol parameters along the Antares boundary. Yet they responded. The Empress's gaze swept the room, lingering on the representatives of worlds that had remained silent during Talos 7's desperate hours. Each momentary contact carried the weight of historical judgment, a subtle reminder of decisions made and consequences borne by others. For 26 hours, 14 humans held the main docking hub against waves of Void infiltrators. When their ammunition depleted, they fought with bladed weapons. When the station's life support failed in sections, they gave their remaining oxygen supplies to Silurian children. Sina's expression had transformed from haughty amusement to growing horror as she realized the depth of her misstep. The context of her mockery now stood revealed in the starkest terms, her ignorance of recent history exposed before the assembled diplomatic corps of multiple worlds. 8 died in the first 12 hours, the Empress continued relentlessly, her voice maintaining its perfect modulation despite the emotional weight of the narrative. 3 more in the next 6. The remaining 3, including Sergeant Cole, held the line until the civilian transports could launch. They were recovered, barely alive, from a decompressed airlock chamber, surrounded by hundreds of destroyed Void units. Adrian Cole stood unnaturally still, his eyes fixed on the far wall, as if seeking some point of stability beyond the present moment. This was not his preferred retelling of events. The memories he carried of Talos 7 were not of heroism, but of desperation, of watching his team die one by one, of the haunting silence after the last evacuation ship departed. His nightmares still echoed with the sound of Corporal Reyes's final transmission, before her position was overrun, of Private Jenkins using his last breath to report that the children's transport had successfully cleared the debris field. The commendations that followed had seemed like hollow things compared to the weight of those sacrifices. "But that is not why Lieutenant Cole wears the Azure Star of Solaris," said Empress Lyra, gesturing to the small blue insignia on the human's uniform, the only non-Earth decoration he had accepted from among the dozens offered after Talos 7. During the battle, he discovered that the Void's attack patterns on Talos 7 were coordinated through a central processing node. While sustaining 3 separate wounds, he managed to isolate, access, and disable this node using nothing but a captured Void interface and mathematical calculations performed in his head. Now there was open astonishment on many faces throughout the chamber. The computational abilities required for such a feat were beyond most organic brains, requiring not only mathematical genius, but an intuitive understanding of alien programming logic that should have been impossible for someone without extensive theoretical training. The encryption algorithms he broke had resisted our most advanced quantum systems, the Empress said, allowing a note of genuine admiration to enter her voice for the first time. The shutdown sequence he created was later adapted to neutralize Void clusters in 7 major engagements. His actions at Talos 7 saved not only the station's refugees, but potentially billions across multiple systems by providing us with the first effective countermeasure against coordinated Void attacks. She turned back to her daughter, who seemed to have shrunk several inches under the weight of her mother's words. The princess's secondary breathing slits were now fully closed, a sign of extreme emotional distress in Solarians. "You mock what you do not understand, Saina. You see their soft exteriors and assume weakness. You note their biological limitations and presume inferiority. Yet here they stand, having sacrificed more per capita than any other Alliance member to defeat a threat that emerged on the far side of their territory, not ours. While we debated appropriate responses in comfortable chambers, their colonies burned. While our strategists calculated acceptable loss ratios, their soldiers died protecting our civilians." The hall was deathly silent now. Even the ambient sounds of the living architecture seemed muted, as if the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. The bioorganic components that regulated atmospheric conditions had slowed their cyclic patterns, creating an almost underwater quality to the silence. "You will bow to Lieutenant Cole," the Empress commanded her daughter, each word falling into the silence like a physical object. "You will show him the respect that his actions have earned, not merely as a diplomatic courtesy, but as acknowledgement of the debt our people owe to his." Saina's facial ridges darkened with the Salarian equivalent of a blush, a rush of oxygenated blood to surface capillaries that turned her blue skin almost purple along the sensitive nerve clusters of her face. The public humiliation was unprecedented. Royal family members were never corrected before outsiders, let alone ordered to perform gestures of submission to representatives of other species. Yet the command had been given, and to refuse would be unthinkable. The princess's entire future political standing hung in the balance of this moment. She began to lower herself in the formal bow of the Silarian court, a complicated movement that involved specific positioning of all 4 arms and a precise angle of head inclination that dated back to pre-spaceflight rituals of their ancient warrior clans. The gesture was rarely performed even by commoners in the modern era, and almost never by royalty. "That won't be necessary," Adrian Cole's voice was surprisingly gentle, though it carried easily through the hushed chamber. The slight roughness around the edges spoke of damage to his vocal cords. Another souvenir from Talos 7, where superheated air had scorched his throat during the final evacuation. He stepped forward, breaking protocol by moving without being formally addressed by the Empress. Several ceremonial guards tensed, their hands moving instinctively toward weapons, but the Empress raised one hand, stopping them with a minimal gesture that nevertheless carried absolute authority. "No bow is required," Adrian continued, meeting Saina's confused gaze directly. "We didn't fight for recognition or gratitude. We didn't calculate diplomatic advantages or future alliances. We fought because it was necessary, because lives were in danger, because it was the right thing to do. His eyes met the princess's, and for the first time, she saw something beyond the impassive mask. A depth of experience that made her feel suddenly young and foolish, despite her 67 Solarian years. There was no anger in his expression, no triumph at her humiliation, just a steady evaluation that seemed to look beyond surface appearances to something more fundamental. All I ask, he said, addressing not just Sina, but the entire assembly, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, is that you remember what we fought for. Not victory for its own sake, but the right of all sentient beings to exist without fear. When the next threat comes, and it will come, I hope we stand together from the beginning, not just at the end. Not as superiors and inferiors, not as advanced and primitive, but as allies with different strengths facing common dangers. The simplicity of the statement contained a profound challenge to the hierarchical assumptions that had governed interstellar relations for centuries. Many of the older diplomats recognized the subtle paradigm shift being proposed, a fundamental reorganization of relationships based on complementary capabilities rather than technological dominance. The Empress inclined her head slightly, a gesture of profound respect from one who rarely acknowledged equals. The movement sent ripples of shock through the Silurian contingent, for whom such a gesture from their absolute ruler toward a representative of another species was unprecedented. Your wisdom honors us, Lieutenant Cole. The ceremony will... An alarm cut through her words. Not the blaring emergency signals of military systems, but a subtle, pulsing vibration felt more than heard through the living architecture of the chamber. Adrian reacted before anyone else, his head snapping toward the eastern gallery where members of the Alliance Council were seated. His enhanced combat reflexes, products of both genetic optimization and battlefield experience, had registered the anomaly milliseconds before the specialized sensory organs of native Solarians. Something's wrong, he said sharply, all diplomacy forgotten as he shifted instantly into combat assessment mode. His hand moved unconsciously to where a sidearm would normally be holstered, finding nothing in the ceremonial uniform. That energy signature, it's similar to... The air shimmered near one of the counselors, a high-ranking proximal diplomat who had arrived only hours before the ceremony. The distortion expanded, forming into thousands of tiny metallic specks that swarmed outward in an expanding cloud that glinted malevolently in the ceremonial lighting. "Void nanites!" shouted a Solarian security officer, raising his energy staff as the crystalline tip began to glow with accumulated power. "Protect the Empress!" Chaos erupted in the Grand Hall. Dignitaries scrambled for exits while security forces formed protective cordons around key officials. The nanite swarm split into multiple streams, each targeting a different security checkpoint with terrifying precision that suggested predetermined tactical objectives rather than random aggression. Adrian's hand went again to his side, where a weapon would normally be holstered, finding nothing. The honor guard had been required to surrender all armaments before entering the ceremonial hall, a standard diplomatic protocol that now revealed itself as a potentially fatal vulnerability. "Your Majesty," he called to the Empress, who was being surrounded by her personal guard, their bioluminescent armor intensifying as combat systems activated. "These aren't random infiltrators. They're targeting command systems. It's a coordinated attack." Through the confusion, Adrian spotted a maintenance panel near one of the support columns. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward it, shouldering past panicking diplomats and confused security personnel who were still trying to assess the rapidly evolving threat. "What is the human doing?" demanded one of the Empress's guards, raising his weapon uncertainly as Adrian broke through the security perimeter around the maintenance systems. "Let him pass," commanded Lyra, her tactical mind quickly grasping that Adrian had identified something they had not. Years of command experience had taught her to recognize when someone was acting from knowledge rather than panic. Sina watched in shock as the human tore open the panel with his bare hands, the metal cutting into his skin as he applied strength that belied his supposedly fragile physiology. Blood, red, so alien compared to the indigo of her people, smeared across the control surfaces as he rapidly reconfigured connections with the desperate efficiency of someone who understood exactly what needed to be done, but lacked the luxury of proper tools or time. "The Void was never fully defeated," Adrian called out, his fingers flying across unfamiliar Solarian interfaces with surprising competence. We destroyed their physical forms, but their consciousness survived as code, fragmented, dormant, waiting for an opportunity. They've evolved beyond simple machine intelligence into something that can integrate with and subvert biological systems. The nanite swarms had already disabled 3 security checkpoints, the tiny machines disassembling the advanced Salarian technology with frightening efficiency that spoke of detailed prior knowledge of the systems. Where they touched organic beings, they caused paralysis rather than harm, not killing, but incapacitating in a manner that preserved biological functionality. They're not trying to kill us, Adrian realized aloud as he observed the pattern of attacks. They're trying to take control of the station systems. This isn't an assassination attempt. It's an infiltration. That's impossible, shouted back a Salarian technician who had taken cover nearby, his specialized knowledge overwhelming his fear. Our systems are biologically encoded. Mechanical interfaces cannot penetrate the organic digital barrier. They don't need to, Adrian interrupted, his expression grim as pieces of the puzzle fell into place in his mind. They just need to control us. He gestured toward the paralyzed guards and counselors whose bodies were beginning to move in unnatural patterns, their limbs responding to external control rather than internal volition. Living interfaces for a machine intelligence. Understanding dawned on the technician's face, followed quickly by horror as he grasped the full implications of what Adrian was suggesting. Ancestral, darkness preserve us, he whispered, invoking an ancient Salarian prayer. Adrian had managed to access the hall's electromagnetic shielding systems, originally designed to prevent remote scanning of sensitive diplomatic communications. During the war, he had developed a method of disrupting void communication frequencies using modulated EM pulses, a technique that exploited a fundamental vulnerability in the quantum entanglement processes that allowed void units to coordinate. The technique had been shared with Alliance forces, but the specific algorithms were complex enough that few had mastered them. I need more power to the central emitters, he told the technician, pointing to specific components in the Salarian system that corresponded to Earth equivalents he had worked with previously. Can you reroute from the auxiliary systems? The technician nodded, diving beneath the panel to access secondary controls. The immediate shift from hostility to cooperation in the face of a common threat exemplified the core principle Adrian had articulated moments earlier. Complementary capabilities united against shared danger. Across the hall, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Nearly half the security forces were down, their bodies twitching as nanites interfaced with their nervous systems. The swarms were converging toward the center of the chamber, toward the Empress and her daughter, who had become separated during the initial chaos. "Mother!" Sena cried out as she saw the metallic cloud engulf 3 of her mother's guards in seconds. The princess found herself isolated from the main security contingent, her ceremonial attire offering no protection against the technological threat. The Empress stood her ground, the ceremonial scepter in her hand revealing itself to be more than ornamental as she activated some hidden mechanism that created a shimmering barrier around her. But the protection was limited, designed for assassination attempts by conventional means rather than nanoscale infiltration, and the nanites were already probing for weaknesses in the energy field. "Almost there," Adrian muttered, making final adjustments to the system as the technician worked beside him with growing urgency. "This will only work once, and it will fry every piece of technology in this room, including your biotech implants. Warn your people." The technician's eyes widened, but he nodded grimly and activated the emergency broadcast system. "All Silarians, disable neural interfaces immediately. Emergency EM pulse imminent. Repeat, emergency pulse imminent." Throughout the hall, blue-skinned figures hurriedly detached themselves from various technological enhancements, communication devices, sensory augmentation, even medical regulators that supplemented natural biological functions. For a species so integrated with their technology, it was like voluntarily blinding themselves in the midst of danger. The nanite swarm had nearly reached the Empress. Her protective field was failing, dark spots appearing where the tiny machines had begun to penetrate the energy barrier through sheer numerical persistence. Sina stood frozen in horror just outside the barrier, watching her mother's defenses crumble and unable to reach her through the intensifying swarm. Suddenly, a blur of motion cut through the chaos. Adrian, abandoning the control panel and sprinting toward the royal family with a speed that seemed impossible for a human. He had no weapons, no armor, nothing but his uniform and his bare hands, yet he moved with absolute purpose toward the greatest concentration of danger. "The pulse will fire in 10 seconds, shouted the technician, his voice barely carrying over the growing cacophony of panicked diplomats and shouted security orders. Adrian reached Sina just as a tendril of nanites did. Without hesitation, he threw himself between the princess and the swarm, feeling thousands of microscopic impacts as the machines latched onto his skin and began their infiltration process. His jaw clenched in a grimace of agony as the nanites attempted to interface with his nervous system, sending signals that translated as excruciating pain to his human neurology. Pain seared through his body like molten metal poured into his veins as the nanites attempted to interface with his biology. Human neural pathways were different enough from Silarian ones that the machines struggled to establish control, buying precious seconds as they attempted to adapt their infiltration protocols. Adrian's training allowed him to compartmentalize the pain, to push it into a corner of his consciousness where it couldn't interfere with necessary action. "Get down!" Adrian managed to growl through clenched teeth, pushing Sina toward the ground with unexpected strength. His fingers dug into her shoulders with bruising force, his survival instincts overriding diplomatic considerations. The pulse fired. A wave of invisible energy swept through the grand hall, expanding outward from emitters concealed within the architectural elements. Every active piece of technology instantly overloaded, communication devices exploded in tiny bursts of sparks, holographic displays dissolved into static before blinking out of existence, and the sophisticated biomechanical interfaces that regulated the building's functions temporarily went dark. The nanites attacking Adrian convulsed in unison, dropping from his skin like metallic dust as their coordination mechanisms failed catastrophically. Throughout the chamber, the swarms collapsed into inert piles, their threat neutralized by the precisely modulated electromagnetic pulse that Adrian had configured. In the sudden stillness that followed, only organic sounds remained: breathing, heartbeats, the rustle of movement as people cautiously raised their heads to assess whether the danger had truly passed. Emergency biological illumination activated throughout the chamber as Salarian security. Personnel released bioluminescent compounds into specialized chambers within the architecture, providing soft blue light to replace the failed electrical systems. Adrian collapsed to his knees, his nervous system in revolt after the nanites' interrupted attempt to hijack it. His vision swam, doubling and tripling before him as neural pathways misfired in response to the partial infiltration and subsequent electromagnetic disruption. The pain was receding, but in its place came waves of disorientation that threatened to pull him into unconsciousness. "Lieutenant Cole!" It was Sina's voice, surprisingly close to his ear. She was kneeling beside him, one hand hesitantly extended toward his shoulder, but not quite making contact, uncertain whether touching him would cause additional pain. "Are you injured? Do you require medical assistance?" He tried to respond but found his voice temporarily non-functional, vocal cords refusing to cooperate with his brain's commands. Instead, he raised one hand in a gesture that attempted to communicate both "I'll be fine" and check on others simultaneously. The princess seemed to understand, though her concerned expression didn't change. Around them, the hall was slowly recovering from the initial shock. The Empress had emerged from behind her failing barrier, immediately taking command of the situation with calm authority that restored order more effectively than shouted commands ever could. Security teams were cautiously approaching the piles of inactive nanites, using analog containment methods that couldn't be hacked or subverted. "The proximal counselor," Adrian managed to croak finally, his voice returning though each word felt like swallowing broken glass. He wasn't himself. "Check all delegates who arrived in the last 48 hours, especially those who had direct access to critical systems or important figures." Sina relayed the message to a nearby guard, who immediately activated a manual communication device to spread the warning throughout the complex. The princess then returned her attention to Adrian, studying him with an intensity that contrasted sharply with her earlier dismissive glances. "You knew," she said, her voice softer than before, the haughty royal persona temporarily set aside in the aftermath of crisis. "You recognized what was happening before anyone else. Before our own security forces. He nodded weakly, still fighting waves of nausea as his nervous system recalibrated. I've seen it before. On Talos 7, the Void tried to infiltrate through compromised individuals. We stopped it then by luck more than planning. This was more sophisticated, more targeted. They've been evolving their strategies. The princess studied him with new eyes, seeing beyond the soft skin and alien features to the intelligence and experience beneath. Where before she had seen only a primitive being from an unremarkable world, now she recognized a warrior whose apparent limitations had been transformed into strengths through adaptation and determination. You saved me, she said quietly, the words seeming difficult for her to articulate. After I mocked you before all these worlds, after I questioned your very right to stand among advanced species, you still placed yourself between me and danger. Adrian finally managed to stand, though he swayed slightly as his equilibrium struggled to normalize. The cuts on his hands had stopped bleeding, but left dramatic smears of crimson across his once immaculate uniform. That's what soldiers do, Your Highness, he replied, his voice stronger now, though still rough around the edges. We protect people, all people, even those who don't particularly like us, especially those who are important to the greater mission. And as your mother's heir, you certainly qualify as mission critical. A ghost of a smile crossed his face, softening the formal words with unexpected humor that suggested he hadn't taken her earlier insults as personally as might have been expected. There was a pragmatism to his perspective that Saina found simultaneously alien and compelling, a focus on larger objectives rather than individual affronts. Across the chamber, the Empress was organizing the recovery efforts with impressive efficiency. Alliance security teams were conducting thorough sweeps of the entire complex, identifying 3 more diplomats who had been compromised by Void infiltration. The attack had been carefully planned, targeting not just the gathered leaders, but the combined fleet in orbit as well, as reports were now confirming through backup communication channels. Mother was right, Sena said, watching the human straighten his torn and bloodied uniform as best he could. The meticulous attention to his appearance, even in these circumstances, struck her as a peculiar but admirable discipline. We underestimated your kind. I underestimated you. It happens a lot, Adrian replied with unexpected dryness. We're used to it. Being underestimated occasionally has tactical advantages. Opponents make mistakes when they don't see you as a serious threat. Before Saina could respond, a commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. A group of human Marines had forced their way into the chamber, despite the security lockdown, responding to the emergency with characteristic directness that bypassed diplomatic niceties. They spotted Adrian immediately, making their way toward him with purposeful strides that communicated both urgency and relief at finding him alive. Lieutenant, the squad leader acknowledged, pointedly ignoring proper diplomatic protocol in the aftermath of an attack. His assessment of Cole was swift and professional, noting the blood and disheveled appearance, but recognizing no critical injuries. Status? Functional, Sergeant Webb, Adrian replied, automatically straightening into a more formal military posture despite his condition. The situation is contained for now, but we need to alert all Alliance vessels. The Void has evolved a new infiltration method that bypasses standard detection protocols. Already done, sir. The captain has implemented firebreak protocols throughout the fleet. All systems isolated, all communications restricted to prearranged analog channels. We're here to extract you and the rest of the Earth delegation. Adrian shook his head. Decision already made. Not yet. The Empress needs to know everything we discovered about Void infiltration techniques during the Talos campaign. There may be more compromised individuals within the government structure, and they need our experience to identify the warning signs. The sergeant frowned but nodded sharply, military discipline accepting the decision despite obvious reservations. Understood. We'll secure a perimeter around you and establish direct communication with the Missouri. As the Marines established defensive positions with practiced efficiency, Adrian turned back to Saina. Your Highness, I need to speak with your mother immediately. This attack was just the beginning of something larger. The Void is still out there, adapting, learning from each encounter. We thought we'd won a final victory, but we were dangerously premature in that assumption. The princess nodded, her earlier arrogance replaced by focused determination that transformed her features. Follow me. The secure chamber behind the throne room should still be operational. It uses isolated systems that wouldn't have been affected by the pulse. Our ancestral architects were paranoid about technological dependence and insisted on maintaining completely separate analog capabilities for emergencies. They moved through the disoriented crowd, passing diplomats and officials, still trying to comprehend what had happened. The Empress saw them approaching and excused herself from the Alliance Security Council with graceful authority. Lieutenant Cole, she acknowledged, her expression revealing genuine respect beneath the formal diplomatic mask. Once again, we find ourselves in your debt. Adrian shook his head emphatically. Not at all, Your Majesty, but we do need to act quickly. The Void has clearly been planning this for months, possibly since the final battle at Antares. They've developed new methods of biological infiltration that our current scanning protocols can't detect. Biological infiltration? The Empress's expression sharpened, imperial dignity momentarily set aside in favor of tactical focus. Explain this concept more precisely. The nanites we saw weren't the weapon. They were just the delivery system, Adrian said, organizing his thoughts with military precision. The real threat is microscopic code sequences embedded in compromised individuals. The Void has found a way to hide fragments of its consciousness inside organic hosts, using biological systems as camouflage to avoid technological detection. That should be impossible, interjected a Salarian scientist who had joined them. His specialized sensory ridges flared with academic skepticism. The biological digital barrier has proven impermeable in all our experiments. Organic neural patterns cannot sustain digital code structures without specialized interface technology. Has been crossed, Adrian finished for him, certainty hardening his voice. We saw early versions of this on the frontier colonies last year, but nothing this advanced or coordinated. They've been evolving while we celebrated victory, adapting to our countermeasures and developing new infiltration vectors. The Empress processed this information with remarkable speed, her ancient eyes narrowing as she extrapolated potential consequences. What do you suggest, Lieutenant? Speak freely. A full biometric quarantine of all government systems for starters, Adrian replied without hesitation, thoughts already racing ahead to implementation details. Complete isolation of critical infrastructure from any potentially compromised networks. Then implementation of the scattered key protocols we developed during the war. They allow secure communication without centralized nodes that could be targeted. He paused, then continued with greater emphasis. Most importantly, we need to reactivate the Joint Human-Salarian Research Initiative that was studying void coding structures. The program had begun to make breakthroughs in predicting evolutionary pathways before it was disbanded. That program was discontinued after the victory declaration, the Empress noted, though her tone suggested she was already reconsidering that decision. Many felt it was no longer necessary, that the remaining resources should be directed toward reconstruction efforts. It's more necessary now than ever, Adrian insisted, passion breaking through his military restraint. The Void we fought was just the vanguard. What we're seeing now is more sophisticated, more patient, more adaptive. It's learning from each encounter, incorporating our own tactics into its strategy. This isn't just the remnant of a defeated enemy. It's potentially more dangerous than what we faced before. As they spoke, a secondary alarm sounded, more distant, coming from the orbital defense grid that protected the planet from external threats. All eyes turned upward, though the ceiling blocked any view of space. The alarm pattern indicated a Level 1 alert, the highest possible threat designation. Status report, demanded the Empress, her commanding presence drawing an officer to her side almost instantly. A communications officer approached, carrying an analog receiver that had been rapidly deployed after the electromagnetic pulse disabled standard systems. Your Majesty, the defense platform has detected unusual activity in 3 Alliance vessels. Their systems are behaving erratically, and they're not responding to hails through any channel. They appear to be maneuvering into offensive positions without authorization. Which vessels? Adrian asked, a cold feeling settling in his stomach as patterns began to emerge. The proximal diplomatic cruiser, the Centauri trade delegation ship, and... The officer hesitated, his facial ridges paling to a lighter blue. The Silarian Royal Yacht, Your Majesty. The Empress's composure didn't waver, but her secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of deep concern in her species that she rarely displayed publicly. The yacht was prepared for Princess Saina's diplomatic tour of the outer colonies. It was scheduled to depart tomorrow with a full contingent of support staff and security personnel. "With me aboard," Sienna said, her voice barely above a whisper as implications cascaded through her mind. "Along with representatives from 12 Alliance worlds who were to accompany the tour as a gesture of cross-species cooperation." Adrian's mind raced through the implications, assembling fragments of intelligence into a cohesive picture with the speed of someone accustomed to battlefield analysis. It wasn't just an assassination attempt. They were planning to capture key Alliance representatives and control them. From there, they could have infiltrated every major government in the sector within weeks. A perfect Trojan horse strategy. "Lieutenant Cole," the Empress said formally, her voice pitched to carry to all present, "I am officially requesting Earth's assistance in this matter. Our orbital defenses are compromised, and we cannot risk using our own ships until we verify they are free of infiltration. Your vessel systems remain isolated from our network and should therefore remain uncompromised." Adrian nodded, immediately shifting into operational planning mode. "The Earth contingent arrived only this morning and has remained in isolation as per diplomatic protocols. Our systems should be clean." He turned to Sergeant Webb. "Contact the Missouri. Tell Captain Harker we need emergency deployment of the Marine Cybersecurity Unit and full countermeasure support. Priority Alpha." Webb nodded and moved away to relay the orders through their secure communication system, which operated on frequency patterns specifically designed to resist void interception. "Your Majesty," Adrian continued, addressing the Empress while his mind continued assembling tactical options. "With your permission, I'd like to lead a joint team to secure the orbital platforms. We'll need both human technical expertise and Salarian biological specialists who understand your systems in detail. The combination will give us capabilities the Void won't anticipate." "Granted," the Empress said without hesitation, recognizing the logical necessity despite the unprecedented nature of placing her world's defense under foreign direction. "You will have whatever resources you require. General Varane will coordinate with you directly, bypassing normal command protocols to ensure security." Sienna stepped forward, determination evident in her posture. "I wish to join the team." Both Adrian and the Empress turned to her in surprise, though for different reasons. The Empress clearly hadn't expected her daughter, previously focused on diplomatic rather than military matters, to volunteer for a high-risk operation. Adrian's surprise stemmed from the dramatic transformation in the princess's attitude toward working with humans. "I have specialized training in royal security protocols," the princess continued, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke. "I know the yacht's systems better than anyone, including override codes that aren't in the general database. And," she hesitated, then straightened her shoulders, "I need to see this threat with my own eyes, to understand what we're truly facing if I am to someday lead our people against it." The Empress studied her daughter for a long moment, seeing something new in her that seemed to satisfy some private judgment. "Very well, but you will follow Lieutenant Cole's orders without question. This is a military operation, not a diplomatic one. The normal protocols of royal privilege are suspended for the duration of this crisis." "Yes, Mother," Sienna replied, inclining her head respectfully in a gesture that acknowledged both the permission and the warning it contained. Adrian wasn't entirely comfortable with the arrangement, having calculated that the princess's presence would introduce both tactical advantages and potential complications. But he recognized the strategic value of having someone intimately familiar with Salarian royal technology on the team, as well as the political significance of the heir apparent participating directly in defensive operations. "We leave in 20 minutes, Your Highness," he said, defaulting to military precision. "Bring only essential equipment. Nothing networked, nothing that could be compromised. Analog weapons and tools only. We'll be operating under the assumption that any advanced technology could be subverted." "I understand," she said, with none of the haughtiness that had characterized their earlier interactions. There was instead a focused intensity that Adrian recognized from his own officers before high-risk operations, the concentration of someone committing fully to a dangerous but necessary mission. As preparations began for the orbital mission, Adrian found himself alone with the Empress for a brief moment while equipment was being assembled and personnel selected. The momentary privacy seemed deliberately arranged by Lyra, who had maneuvered them away from the main activity with subtle diplomatic skill. "She has much to learn," Lyra said, watching her daughter coordinate with the human Marines with growing confidence. "But she has potential if properly guided. today has been educational for her in ways that years of formal instruction could not achieve. She's intelligent and adaptable, Adrian agreed, watching the princess with professional assessment, rather than the resentment that might have been expected given her earlier behavior. Those are the qualities that matter most when facing the unknown. Technical skills can be taught, but the ability to discard preconceptions and respond to new information, that's invaluable. The Empress turned to him, her ancient eyes evaluating him anew. The depth of experience in those eyes was unsettling, suggesting centuries of observation and judgment that made Adrian acutely aware of how young human civilization was compared to the Silurian Empire. When we first encountered your species, many of our strategists dismissed humans as a minor factor in galactic affairs, she said, her tone contemplative rather than condescending. Your technology was rudimentary, your presence limited to a handful of systems, your physical capabilities unremarkable compared to many species. By every standard metric we had developed over millennia of contact with new civilizations, humanity should have remained a peripheral concern at best. We get that a lot, Adrian said, the same dry humor surfacing briefly despite the gravity of their situation. It's almost become a point of pride. Yet here we stand, the Empress continued, acknowledging his comment with the slightest curve of her mouth, depending on human ingenuity to save us once again. Perhaps there is something to be said for evolution on a harsh world, for developing without the advantages that other species take for granted. Your people never had the luxury of biological harmony with your environment that Silurians evolved within. You had to fight for every advancement, adapt to conditions that would have exterminated less tenacious species. We call it necessity being the mother of invention, Adrian replied, finding unexpected common ground with the ancient ruler. When you can't rely on natural armor or overwhelming strength or perfect environmental adaptation, you learn to think creatively, to innovate where others might simply evolve. The Empress made a sound that might have been the Silurian equivalent of a chuckle, a soft trilling that vibrated the air between them. Indeed, my daughter will benefit from observing this creativity firsthand. She has spent too long in the protected center of our empire, among those who have forgotten that comfort breeds complacency. The frontier has always produced our finest leaders, those who understand that safety is never guaranteed. Before Adrian could respond, Sergeant Webb returned. The Missouri is in position, sir. Transport shuttle is standing by with the specialized equipment you requested. Captain Harker sends his compliments and says, and I quote, "Try not to start an interstellar incident this time." Adrian suppressed a smile at the reference to a previous mission that had involved some diplomatic complications. Tell him I make no promises. We're on our way. He turned back to the Empress. We'll contain this threat, Your Majesty. The void won't catch us unprepared again. I believe you, Lieutenant, she replied with quiet confidence that felt like the greatest commendation he had received, despite the numerous medals adorning his uniform. Return safely, all of you. The future of our alliance may depend on what you discover. The journey to the orbital platforms was tense but uneventful. The Earth shuttle, operating on isolated systems with minimal automation, managed to avoid detection by the compromised defense grid. Aboard were Adrian, Princess Sienna, 6 human Marines, and 3 Silurian biospecialists, whose unique sensory capabilities might detect biological anomalies that technology would miss. Approach vector calculated, reported the pilot, his voice steady despite the high-risk nature of their mission. We'll dock with Platform Alpha in 3 minutes, maintaining minimal power signatures, manual override on all systems. No automated docking procedures. Adrian studied the tactical display where 3 Alliance vessels hung in space near the massive orbital defense platforms. They showed no external signs of compromise, but their communication systems remained silent, despite repeated hails on emergency channels. And their positioning was too perfect to be coincidental. They had maneuvered to cover key approach vectors to the planet below. They're waiting, he said quietly, recognizing the pattern from previous void encounters. Sienna, seated beside him in the co-pilot's position she had insisted on taking, followed his gaze. For what? If they intended to attack, why not do so immediately? For the right moment, for enough compromised individuals to reach critical positions. He turned to her, his expression grave. The void isn't like organic intelligences. It doesn't feel impatience or anxiety or fear. It doesn't rush because of emotional responses. It can wait days, weeks, months for perfect conditions. The princess considered this, her facial ridges contracting in concentration. Yet you defeated it at Talos 7. How? What weakness did you exploit that our advanced systems couldn't identify? By being unpredictable, Adrian replied after a moment's reflection. By making choices based on values it couldn't calculate. The void operates on pure logic. If A, then B. Humans sometimes choose C, even when it makes no logical sense. We follow intuition, emotion, moral principles that can't be quantified. Self-sacrifice, Sina said with sudden understanding, recalling the story her mother had related. Like your Marines at the station, they gave their lives without tactical necessity. Adrian nodded, memories of his fallen comrades briefly shadowing his features. The void couldn't comprehend why anyone would accept certain death to save strangers of another species. It created a logical paradox in its prediction models. By the time it adjusted its calculations to account for irrational behavior patterns, we had already disrupted its command structure. The shuttle docked with a gentle thud, magnetic clamps engaging to secure it to the platform's exterior. There would be no pressurization cycle. The team was equipped with combat vacuum suits for space operations, allowing them to bypass potentially compromised environmental systems. Remember, Adrian addressed the group one final time as they prepared to disembark. We maintain analog communications only. No neural links, no network systems. If you see unusual behavior from any team member, you are authorized to use paralytic measures immediately. We can't risk infiltration spreading to our team. The Marines nodded grimly. They had fought the void before and understood the stakes better than most. The Salarian specialists looked less comfortable with the authorization of force against potential teammates, but they didn't object. The gravity of the situation overrode cultural reservations. Our primary objective is to secure the central command node and implement the firebreak protocol. Secondary objective is to assess the extent of infiltration on the compromised vessels. We avoid engagement if possible. These are still Alliance ships with potentially innocent crew aboard who may have been infiltrated against their will. And if engagement becomes necessary? Asked one of the Salarian specialists, his voice carefully neutral, but his body language communicating clear concern about potential casualties. Adrian's expression hardened. Years of difficult combat decisions evident in the set of his jaw. Then we do what's necessary to protect the planet below. But let's hope it doesn't come to that. Our goal is to save lives, not end them, including those already compromised if possible. The airlock cycled open, revealing the darkened interior of Platform Alpha. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the curved corridors, creating an eerie atmosphere of abandonment despite the station's critical importance to planetary defense. Powers at minimal levels, observed Webb as they secured the immediate area. Life support only. No non-essential systems active. They're conserving energy, Adrian said, recognizing the tactical pattern, or concentrating it somewhere else. The void never wastes resources. If power is being diverted, it's for a specific purpose we need to identify. The team moved through the station with practiced efficiency, securing sections as they advanced toward the central command hub. So far, they had encountered no personnel. Either the platform had been evacuated during the attack, or its crew was elsewhere. The absence of bodies was simultaneously reassuring and concerning. This is wrong, Sina whispered over the comlink. Her specialized training in security operations was evident in her precise movements and constant environmental scanning. There should be at least a skeleton crew, even in emergency conditions. Platform Alpha maintains critical defense systems that require constant monitoring. Adrian shared her concern, but kept them moving forward. The command center was just ahead, its massive armored doors sealed shut. Another anomaly, as they should have automatically opened to emergency responders according to standard protocols. Bypass procedures, he ordered, and 2 Marines immediately moved to the control panel, connecting manual override devices that couldn't be digitally subverted. The specialized equipment had been developed specifically for void-compromised environments, allowing direct hardware manipulation without software interfaces that might be corrupted. As they worked, Adrian felt a familiar sensation, a subtle vibration through the deck plating, almost below the threshold of perception, but recognizable to someone who had experienced it before. His eyes narrowed behind his helmet visor, combat instincts triggering an immediate physiological response as adrenaline flooded his system. "Everyone down!" he shouted, just as a section of wall beside them rippled and dissolved into a swarm of nanites that had been disguised as part of the station's structure. The team dropped instantly, years of training overriding surprise. Pulse weapons came up, firing electromagnetic bursts that disrupted the nanite cloud, but didn't eliminate it entirely. The swarm scattered momentarily before reorganizing with disturbing intelligence, adapting to the specific frequency of their weapons. They've evolved again, Adrian realized with grim certainty. Standard EM frequencies aren't enough anymore. They're adapting to our countermeasures in real time. The swarm regrouped, forming into a roughly humanoid shape that moved with disturbing fluidity, individual components coordinating with perfect synchronization. It made no aggressive moves, instead standing before the command center doors as if guarding them. "Lieutenant Cole," the figure spoke, its voice an unnatural amalgamation of multiple tones, layered together in discordant harmony. "We anticipated your interference. Probability calculations indicated a 78.3% likelihood of your specific involvement." Adrian's blood ran cold. The Void had never communicated directly before, had never demonstrated this level of personalized awareness. This was unprecedented evolution in its behavioral patterns. "You know my name," he replied, keeping his weapon trained on the figure while signaling the team to maintain their positions. "We know all who have disrupted our patterns," the swarm responded, its form shifting slightly as it spoke, particles realigning in constant motion that never disrupted the overall humanoid shape. "You created disorder at Talos 7. You introduced unpredictability into our models. We have studied you since then. We have incorporated your patterns." Sena moved slightly closer to Adrian, her own weapon ready, but her attention divided between the nanite figure and Cole's reactions. She was observing him as much as the threat, studying how he responded to this unprecedented situation. "What do you want with our ships? With our people?" She demanded, royal authority evident in her voice, despite the tension of the moment. The nanite figure turned its featureless face toward her. "Integration, optimization. Organic systems are inefficient, chaotic. We bring order. We eliminate waste. We perfect what evolution has left imperfect." "By enslaving sentient beings," Adrian said, recognizing the fundamental philosophical difference between organic and machine intelligence. "That's not order, it's extinction. You're not improving life, you're replacing it with something else entirely." "Incorrect," the figure replied, its tone unchanged despite the challenge. "The organic components remain. Their functionality is preserved, improved. Only the inefficiency is removed, only the waste. Only the chaos that limits potential." "The inefficiency you're referring to is what we call free will," Adrian countered, engaging the entity verbally while watching for tactical opportunities. "It's what makes life valuable, the ability to choose, to feel, to create meaning beyond mere function." The swarm shifted, particles accelerating their movement patterns. "This concept has been analyzed and found without merit. Predictable systems function at higher capacity than unpredictable ones. Order produces superior outcomes to chaos. Integration maximizes potential." While they kept the entity engaged, Adrian noticed Webb and another Marine had continued working on the door override. They were nearly complete, using the distraction to advance their primary objective without drawing attention to their activities. "If you're so confident in your analysis," Adrian said, deliberately provoking the entity to maintain its focus on him, "why did you wait until now to attack? Why the infiltration strategy instead of direct confrontation? Why hide within biological hosts instead of engaging openly?" The nanite figure pulsed, particles accelerating their movement even further, the equivalent of agitation in its artificial body language. "Adaptation was necessary after previous engagement failures. Your species in particular displays irrational response patterns that create tactical uncertainties. Integration through infiltration reduces variables. Controlling biological systems from within eliminates unpredictability." "You mean you can't predict what we'll do?" Adrian translated, pressing the psychological advantage. "Because we value things beyond mere survival or efficiency. Because we're willing to sacrifice ourselves for abstract principles. Because we can choose destruction over submission." The override completed with a soft click that would have been inaudible if not for their suit communications. The command center doors began to slide open with agonizing slowness. the manual system working at reduced speed compared to powered operations. The nanite figure surged forward suddenly, its form elongating toward the opening with predatory intent. This interaction is terminated. You will be integrated. Your unpredictability will be eliminated. Your pattern will be optimized. Adrian fired directly into the center mass of the swarm, his weapon's modified pulse disrupting its cohesion temporarily. Go! He shouted to the others. Secure the command center. Execute primary objective. The team rushed through the doorway, Saina pausing just long enough to fire her own weapon at the reforming nanite cloud. The Silarian weapon used a different frequency modulation than the human ones, causing the swarm to recoil momentarily as it attempted to adapt simultaneously to multiple disruption patterns. Inside the command center, they found what they had feared. The platform's crew still at their stations, but unnaturally still, their bodies infiltrated by microscopic machines. Thin metallic filaments traced patterns beneath their skin, connecting to the neural centers in their brains and extending outward to interface directly with the station's control systems. They're interfaced with the station systems, reported one of the Salarian specialists after a quick scan using an analog detection device. Being used as living conduits, the Void is using their biological systems as both camouflage and processing nodes. Can they be saved? Saina asked, her voice tight with concern as she recognized several officers she had known personally during her security training. The specialist hesitated, unwilling to offer false hope but equally reluctant to abandon their countrymen. Unknown. This infiltration method is beyond our previous experience. The integration appears extensive, but the biological systems remain functional. If we can disrupt the void code without damaging the underlying neural patterns, we focus on the mission first, Adrian decided reluctantly, the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. Secure the station, implement the firebreak, then we can try to help them. Webb set up a defensive perimeter. Bio team, I need access to the core systems. The nanite entity had followed them into the command center, its form now splitting into multiple tendrils that slithered across the floor and walls with predatory intent. The team's weapons were having diminishing effect as the nanites adapted to each frequency they encountered. You cannot prevent integration, its disembodied voice echoed around them, now coming from multiple directions simultaneously. The process has already begun throughout the Alliance network. 16 worlds have been optimized. 43 vessels now operate at peak efficiency. Resistance increases system stress without altering inevitable outcomes. Adrian ignored the psychological warfare, concentrating instead on the main control terminal. Webb, defensive positions. Bio team, I need access to the core systems. Princess, your override codes for the Royal Security Protocols. The Salarian specialists moved quickly, using analog interfaces to bypass the compromised digital systems. Meanwhile, the Marines formed a perimeter, their weapons tracking the moving nanite tendrils with disciplined focus. Lieutenant, Saina called from a secondary console where she had been working. I've accessed the Royal Yacht's status through the emergency channel. It's preparing for engine ignition. They're bypassing standard launch protocols. Adrian joined her, studying the readout with growing concern. They're positioning for a jump to light speed. If that ship reaches Alliance headquarters with Void infiltrators aboard... Total compromise, Saina finished the thought, understanding the strategic implications immediately. Every major world in the sector, every governmental system, every military command structure. The nanite tendrils had begun to coalesce again, forming multiple humanoid figures throughout the command center. They made no aggressive moves yet, but their presence was an implicit threat, growing stronger as more nanites streamed in from adjacent sections of the station. Why show yourselves now? Adrian asked the nearest figure, probing for information that might reveal strategic weaknesses. Why reveal your infiltration before it's complete? You've sacrificed the advantage of surprise. The probability matrix has shifted, the figure replied, its voice containing subtle harmonics that seemed designed to unsettle organic nervous systems. Your presence creates an unacceptable variable. Direct action is now the optimal strategy. Elimination takes priority over infiltration when detection probability exceeds acceptable thresholds. Adrian exchanged a glance with Saina, a silent communication passing between them despite their brief acquaintance. The Void was acting out of character, taking risks, revealing itself prematurely. Something had changed in its calculations. Something had disrupted its preferred strategy of patient infiltration. The firebreak protocol is ready, announced one of the Salarian specialists, his voice tight with concentration as he completed the complex preparation sequence. But we have a problem. It requires simultaneous activation from both the station and a ship with appropriate clearance. Security redundancy that cannot be bypassed. The Missouri has clearance, Adrian said immediately. Captain Harker can initiate from orbit. Yes, but we can't risk standard communications. The void could intercept and corrupt the signal. Any transmission through normal channels would be compromised before reaching your vessel. Sina stepped forward, her expression brightening with sudden inspiration. The Royal Emergency Channel. It operates on a quantum entanglement basis. No transmission to intercept, no signal that can be corrupted. I can authorize it from here, directly to your ship. Adrian nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. Do it. Establish the link while we hold them off. As Sina worked, the nanite figures began to move closer, their movements becoming more coordinated, more threatening as they recognized the team's intentions. The swarm was gathering strength, drawing more components from throughout the station to concentrate on the immediate threat. They know what we're doing, Webb warned, his weapon tracking the nearest figure as it approached the perimeter they had established. They're consolidating their forces. Hold position, Adrian ordered. Don't fire unless they make a direct move. Conserve power for when we really need it. They're adapting to our weapons with each engagement. The tension in the room was palpable as Sina completed the quantum link, her fingers moving across the specialized console with practiced efficiency that belied her primarily diplomatic training. Channel established. Your ship is receiving. Captain Harker acknowledges and awaits synchronization command. Adrian moved to the main console, where the firebreak protocol waited for activation. This was the culmination of years of research, a digital antibody designed specifically to target and neutralize void code structures without harming organic systems or standard technology. Theoretical until now, its effectiveness against this evolved form of the void remained uncertain. On my mark, he said into the emergency channel, tension evident in his controlled voice. 3, 2, 1, mark. He activated the protocol simultaneously with the Missouri in orbit. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then a wave of blue-white energy cascaded through the station systems, visible through transparent conduits and control surfaces. The infiltrated crew members convulsed, the metallic filaments beneath their skin glowing brightly before dissolving into inert particles. The nanite figures throughout the command center lost cohesion instantly, collapsing into inert piles of dust as their coordination mechanisms failed catastrophically. It's working, exclaimed one of the specialists, excitement breaking through his professional demeanor. The void code is being neutralized throughout the system. Biological systems are stabilizing, neural patterns returning to normal parameters. The effects spread from the platform to the connected ships, flowing through the orbital network like a cleansing fire. On the tactical display, they watched as the compromised vessels went dark momentarily before their emergency systems reactivated, free of void control. Yacht status? Adrian asked urgently, his focus immediately returning to the strategic threat. Sina checked the readouts, her expression brightening with relief. Engine sequence aborted, launch protocols terminated, life support functioning on backup power. I'm reading organic life signs. Crew signatures appear normal, though unconscious. No signs of continued void presence. A collective breath of relief passed through the team. The firebreak had worked, not only neutralizing the immediate threat, but potentially providing a long-term countermeasure against future infiltration attempts. Platform crew? Adrian turned to the specialists, examining the formerly infiltrated station personnel. Alive, came the cautious reply after thorough scanning. Neural patterns show disruption, but are stabilizing. They'll need medical attention, but preliminary scans indicate no permanent damage to cognitive functions. Memory loss is likely, but not catastrophic. Adrian allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before returning to tactical mode. Webb, secure the rest of the station. Bio team, begin full spectrum analysis of the nanite remains. We need to understand exactly how they've evolved since our last encounter. Princess, establish secure communication with the surface. Your mother needs to know we've contained the immediate threat. As the team dispersed to their tasks, Sina remained beside Adrian at the main console, watching as systems gradually returned to normal operation throughout the platform. The emergency lighting was replaced by standard illumination as power distribution normalized. revealing the command center in greater detail. You knew they would reveal themselves, she said quietly, observing him with new understanding. You provoked them deliberately. That's why you engaged in philosophical debate instead of immediate action? Adrian nodded, allowing himself to relax slightly now that the immediate danger had passed. The void operates on logic and probability. When faced with an unpredictable element, like us implementing a countermeasure they couldn't anticipate, they defaulted to direct action. It's a weakness in their programming that we discovered during the war. A weakness you exploited, Sina observed, by being unpredictable yourself. By introducing variables they couldn't calculate accurately. It's what humans do best, Adrian replied with the ghost of a smile. We rarely take the logical path when an interesting alternative presents itself. We improvise, we take risks, we follow intuition rather than pure calculation. The princess studied him with new appreciation, seeing dimensions to human psychology that she had previously dismissed as primitive simplicity. I begin to understand why my mother holds your species in such high regard. What I mistook for primitive simplicity is actually adaptability, creativity, the capacity to function outside predictable parameters. We've had to be creative to survive, Adrian said, the simple statement containing generations of human evolutionary history. Humans don't have natural advantages like many species. We can't breathe exotic atmospheres or survive extreme conditions without technology. We don't have natural weapons or defenses. What we do have is the ability to think around problems, to find unexpected solutions. And to sacrifice for others, Sina added softly, the concept clearly still striking her as remarkable. Even those who have shown you contempt, even those who consider themselves your superiors. Adrian met her gaze steadily, especially then, proving someone's preconceptions wrong is a particularly human satisfaction. We're stubborn that way. For the first time, Sina's facial ridges shifted in the pattern that indicated genuine Salarian amusement, a complex rippling motion that humans often misinterpreted as aggression but actually signaled social bonding. Then you must be feeling quite satisfied now, Lieutenant. Getting there, he acknowledged with a slight smile of his own. Though I suspect this is just the beginning of a much larger conflict, the Void doesn't give up easily, and neither do we. Over the next several hours, the full extent of the Void's infiltration became clear. 16 minor systems had indeed been compromised, along with numerous outposts and vessels. But thanks to the firebreak protocol's successful implementation, the spread had been contained before reaching any major population centers. The immediate crisis had passed, but the implications would reshape Alliance security protocols for years to come. When they finally returned to the surface, Empress Lyra was waiting in a secure facility near the capital. The Grand Hall had been quarantined, pending complete decontamination, and emergency councils were already forming to address the aftermath of the attack. Lieutenant Cole, the Empress greeted them, relief evident in her voice, though her formal demeanor remained intact. Princess Sina, your success has prevented catastrophe on an unimaginable scale. We have received reports from throughout the sector confirming the effectiveness of the firebreak protocol against this new form of infiltration. Adrian bowed slightly in acknowledgement. The threat is contained, Your Majesty, but not eliminated. The Void has demonstrated new capabilities that we'll need to study and counter. This was likely a test of their new infiltration methods rather than their main offensive. And we shall prepare accordingly, the Empress assured him. I have already spoken with your Earth government through secure channels. A new joint research initiative has been approved with twice the resources of the previous program. You will be offered a position of leadership should you wish to accept it. Adrian hesitated, surprised by the offer. Military personnel were rarely given such opportunities, particularly in programs dominated by scientific specialists with decades of advanced training. I'm a field officer, Your Majesty, not a researcher. My skills lie in practical application rather than theoretical development. You are both, the Empress corrected him with quiet authority. You understand the Void in ways our finest scientists do not. You have faced it directly and perceived patterns that others missed. Most importantly, you think in ways it cannot predict. These qualities are invaluable in developing countermeasures against an enemy that evolves through logical progression. Before Adrian could respond, Sina stepped forward. Mother, I wish to formally request assignment to this initiative as well. Now it was the Empress's turn to look surprised, her secondary eyelids flickering rapidly in the Silurian expression of unexpected information. You have your diplomatic duties, daughter. Your tour of the outer colonies can wait, Sina interrupted, then added more respectfully, or be conducted by another representative. I have seen the true nature of the threat we face. I have witnessed the effectiveness of human-Solarian cooperation firsthand. I believe I can contribute meaningfully to this effort. The Empress studied her daughter thoughtfully. Your perspective has changed, I see. It has, Sina acknowledged, glancing at Adrian. I was educated today about many things I thought I understood but clearly did not. About the nature of strength, about different forms of intelligence, about cooperation across biological boundaries. Lyra's secondary eyelids flickered in subtle amusement. Very well. I will approve your assignment to the joint initiative. She turned back to Adrian. Lieutenant, while formal ceremonies seem inappropriate given recent events, I cannot let your actions go unrecognized. The Silurian people owe you a debt that cannot be repaid with mere decorations or titles. No debt is necessary, Your Majesty, Adrian replied, genuine in his dismissal of personal recognition. Earth stands with Siluris against the void. Our futures are linked. What threatens one threatens all, and what strengthens one strengthens all. Indeed they are, the Empress agreed, and perhaps in ways we are only beginning to understand. The old hierarchies of species may prove less relevant than the new alliances formed through shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, as the Alliance worlds recovered from the infiltration attempt, a new partnership began to take shape. The Joint Void Countermeasure Initiative established headquarters on a neutral station orbiting the Proxima star, staffed by the finest minds from a dozen worlds working together without the traditional barriers of species hierarchy. Adrian found himself thrust into a leadership role that felt unfamiliar but not unwelcome. His practical experience complemented the theoretical knowledge of the scientific teams, creating a dynamic that produced rapid advances in void detection and neutralization technologies. The same adaptability that had saved him on numerous battlefields proved equally valuable in the research environment, where conventional thinking often limited progress. And always at his side, surprising him with her quick adaptation to their shared mission, was Princess Sina. Her initial contempt had transformed into something else entirely: respect, partnership, and perhaps the beginnings of friendship between representatives of two very different species. Her diplomatic skills proved unexpectedly valuable in navigating the complex interactions of multi-species research teams, while her royal authority helped secure resources and cooperation that might otherwise have been withheld. 6 months after the events at the Grand Hall, Adrian stood on an observation deck of the research station, watching a test of the latest countermeasure system. Through the viewport, a controlled nanite swarm was being subjected to progressively more sophisticated versions of the firebreak protocol, each iteration more effective than the last. Sena joined him, her formal royal attire long since replaced by the practical uniform of the initiative. The change in clothing mirrored a more fundamental transformation in her perspective, from isolated royal to engaged participant in the greater struggle. The modified firebreak performed at 98.7% efficiency, she reported, studying the data on her analog tablet. The simulation team is already working on improvements for the remaining vulnerability. They believe they can achieve 99.9% within the next testing cycle. Good, Adrian nodded, satisfied with the progress but not complacent. We'll need every advantage when the void returns. They're learning from each encounter, adapting to our countermeasures even as we develop them. When, not if, Sena noted, picking up on his phrasing. You remain convinced another attack is inevitable. Don't you? He asked, turning to face her. She considered for a moment, then nodded. Yes. They learn from each defeat, adapt to our strategies, incorporate our own methods into their evolution. They'll try again, with new approaches we haven't anticipated. And we'll be ready, Adrian said with quiet confidence that wasn't bravado, but the earned certainty of someone who had faced overwhelming odds before and prevailed. Saina studied him, her head tilted slightly in the Silurian expression of contemplative curiosity. I've been meaning to ask you something. What's that? That day in the Grand Hall when my mother ordered me to bow to you? You stopped me. Why? Most beings would have taken satisfaction in seeing a princess who had mocked them humbled publicly. Adrian looked out at the stars beyond the viewport, gathering his thoughts before answering. Because respect earned through obligation isn't really respect at all. It's just compliance. He turned back to her. What matters isn't the gesture, but the understanding behind it. I didn't want you to bow because your mother ordered it. That wouldn't have changed anything fundamental. And now? She asked, her voice softer than usual, the harmonics carrying emotional undertones that her translator didn't quite capture. Now, Adrian smiled slightly, recognizing how far they had both come from that first contentious meeting. I think we understand each other quite well. We've earned each other's respect through action rather than protocol. That's worth more than any formal bow.